Welcome to Face Forward, the inspiring change podcast on all things internal communications, engagement, leadership and change. So here we are, welcome to edition 4 of Face Forward, the inspiring change podcast. It just seems to be recently that we've had amazing views, amazing weather, amazing everything when I've been out chatting to people, and that's no different today because I'm here with Fionnuala Meehan, who is the VP of Google's Marketing Solutions Department for EMEA, up on the 13th floor of Google Docs, and I will post a photograph of the view from here, which is phenomenal because you don't get high up in Dublin very often.
You don't, but it is one of the perks of the job, and it's lovely to look out on Dublin. Sometimes I look at that and go, is that Dublin? Is that my home city? Because it's looking fabulous today.
It is looking fabulous today. So tell me, we'll kick off with an easy one, a little bit about you and your role here in Google, where you've come from.
Yeah, so I've been in Google coming up to 13 years, and started at a time when this office was, getting established very scrappily, and so that was a time of doing various different things. The learning and development team, the telecoms team, the project management team, all sorts of different teams. I had come from AOL, where I'd done a lot of kind of customer service operations, and AOL was a really good place to have worked before Google because it had kind of the whole tech online vibe as well. So after a few years of doing a bit of working in wherever I needed to be, I kind of settled into advertiser operations after a few years, which was customer service around advertising for various markets, and then a few years ago that turned into sales, and so I've been doing sales for EMEA for 2.5 years. That's the day job, which is incredibly interesting, dynamic. So the entire EMEA region, so there's kind of 5 clusters within that, and then from Dublin, so the entire team is based in Dublin. We work with small and medium-sized businesses of all shapes and sizes, indigenous brands. We work with agencies, and really, I suppose, broadly speaking, it's helped them stay ahead of the curve when it comes to online. Now, obviously, advertising is a huge part of that, but it's also helping them to understand, things, how they manage their customer journey, how they manage their customer data, how they show up on mobile versus desktop. All sorts of things. So I think if you ask the team here, that's why people get up in the morning is to work with these businesses. A lot of them you're working with the owners, the founders, and again it's kind of how can they be successful. So I think we feel we're successful when they're successful, and every week we round up the stories of which customers have we worked with this week, have they been able to expand, how have we been able to help them. So that's the day job, and then just over a year ago I took on the site lead role, which is a much broader role, and that's working with the broader Dublin leadership team here, so the heads of functions for everything, engineering, HR, the other sales organisations, the teams that work with publishers, and basically thinking about a site strategy, for want of a better word. So how do we stay connected as a site, with all of those different business functions report into different areas, and how do we connect with what's going on over on the West Coast, and how do we connect with our local community. So those are some of the things that we look at.
Okay, interesting. And I guess when you talk about Google advertising, things like AdWords and those types of platforms that you guys would run. Absolutely,
AdWords. I was saying this at an event during the week that when I started it was basically get your keywords right.
Yeah.
It's developed into a lot more than that. So measurement, audience, attribution models. Obviously we have video now, and display, which are which will represent the growth in advertising online over the next few years. Is actually a lot to do with the display video formats. Search obviously continues to be our hero product, and so it's all of those things.
Okay, it's quite funny talking about Google AdWords, because I know back in the mid 90s when I first started working in London, I know I don't look that old. Don't laugh. That's very unfair.
Sorry.
But we used to do work for clients back in the very early days of SEO, and that was back in the days where if you put the keyword many times in white on a white background buried on the page, that would get you up the rankings.
Oh.
That would actually
Yeah.
help.
I think
are we cleverer than that now?
No, I'm not sure you're supposed to be doing that, Scott. I won't comment on that.
That was in a career long gone. Okay, interesting. And it's great being here in Google, because I think that Google is one of those brands that is really aspirational and that people look at, really hold up high, and you can see that in the number of times that Google appears in the lists of places that people want to work. And I was only having a go this morning at that, about the number of times that happens, and it's number one, number two. What do you think makes it such an aspirational brand and a place for people to want to come and work?
Yeah, it's a high bar, I have to say. It's a high bar to live up to. I think it goes back to the mission. I know that sounds pretty obvious, but if you actually go back to the founder's letter and what they wanted to do, make information universally accessible and useful, that is something that's relevant to every person in the world. And if you think about how that's revolutionised access to information, across the board, and kind of leveled that playing field, it is something that everybody can relate to, I think. And because there was just that relentless focus on getting that thing right, and then taking that idea and thinking about, okay, well, how do we use what we did in search to help with email, and how do we use what we did in search to help with maps, and et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's evolved over the years to, how can we use technology to solve some of the problems that people come up against every day. And so I think because there's that kind of clarity of thought around that mission, I think people look to that and see that it actually makes a difference to them in their daily lives. I think as a company then, again, if you read the founder's letter and the way the company is set up, we're obviously a much bigger company now than we were 19 years ago. But I think to a large extent we've stuck to kind of those values, right, and that culture. Yeah. And that's kind of that's harder and harder to do as the company gets bigger, but there's it's still there, it's in the DNA, it's in the air, and I think that comes through in terms of the products, but also how it's viewed as a place to work. And I suppose as a place to work, is again, there's a huge amount of thinking put into that. We're a data-driven organisation, so everything is analysed, right? So what makes what makes a great manager, or when we say diversity and inclusion, what really matters? When we look at communication, what really matters? Is it the span of control, or is it layers in an organisation? Those kind of things, and then we've started to share that. I mean, if you go into the Rework website, there's a lot of the things that we have been researching over the years when it comes to those types of areas. We've actually just kind of said, okay, look, here it is. You guys learn from it and take it. We've got our great data scientists in-house doing all this work, but we've also shared it. And that sounds like a very scientific approach to something that feels it should be a lot softer and a lot more about the art than the science. But actually data tells you a lot, because people tell you in various ways whether they're happy or not happy, and you can derive a lot of that. You can derive a lot of information then in knowing, well, what do people find important, what makes them happy, what makes a great manager, those kind of things. And
what does make a great manager in Google? What are some of the traits that you look for in your managers when they're leading people?
Yeah, we have a very specific set of attributes, actually, and again, that is based on analysis of when we look at the people who are most happy in our employee survey, what do they value the most. It's a lot about giving great feedback, being a great coach, being able to make tough decisions, not micromanaging. And I know I'm going to miss a few, but I mean, you're getting the general idea. It's somebody who can deliver great results, but equally also build a team. Yeah. I think more recently, the term psychological safety is kind of a term that's used to describe what a manager can create in a great team, which is a team where you feel there's a trust level, and you feel your voice is being listened to, even if you're not necessarily agreeing with everybody, and that will be respected. And again, there's an art in creating that psychological safety as a manager, right, and being kind of an inclusive manager. So we look at it like there's kind of base attributes that again are what you would expect them to be, but even though they're obvious, that doesn't mean that people do them all the time. Then sadly not.
No.
And then there's kind of the more recent kind of focus on inclusion, right? And are you in a team where you feel you can voice your opinion and your opinion is going to be listened to, even if you are a different gender, demographic, or have a different style or cultural background from everyone else in the team.
Okay, interesting. And from a communications perspective, easy for me to say, how do you work with your leaders to ensure that they're the best communicators that they can be?
Yeah, I suppose we spend a lot of time thinking about what we are communicating,
which is a very, very good starting point.
Yeah. Yes.
A lot of organisations don't think about that. They just get out the traps, quick, let's go, and they don't really put too much thinking into the what.
So a lot of time that I spend with my senior leadership team is, what's the message, what's in it for people in the team, and how do we deliver that? What's the tone of the message, and where do we need to be where is it really important to be really consistent? There's definitely kind of a cascading thing that works in the organisation, where things that are important or messages that need to kind of get down to people in the front line doing the job. There's a very intentional way of cascading that, which I think is very important. And then I suppose what I do personally is, we spend a lot of time discussing communications plans. I would also kind of observe my team as well, like when they're doing their all hands or their team meetings. I actually observe some of that to get a sense of, well, how are they talking about the things that I've been talking about, and play that back, and when I do that, always learn about a better way to say something, but also how does it land in the Northern European cluster compared to the Freeth cluster or the UKI cluster, because they can often be different emphasis points.
And when you think about cascade, because I think that the whole cascade thing can be and has been very much vilified in terms of, well, it's just it's a lazy way to do communications. I personally don't believe it is, because I think it gives local leaders, as you go down that waterfall, the opportunity to bring it to life for their people in a way that lands most resonantly. Yeah,
but I mean, things are changing so much. I mean, I think you can't kind of start at the beginning of the year and saying, here are the things we're going to talk about this year, full stop, see you in December. Things change all the time. So fast-paced. I think every sector is fast-paced. This sector is definitely fast-paced. And it's really a way of, I think, transmitting like what is important at the moment for us. As a company, like what is my boss saying, that I need to talk to my team about. So I see it as kind of an empowering thing and helping people hear or feel connected, right? So if I hear my manager talking about something and I know that I also heard Sundar talk about it at TGIF, then I know what I do is related to that in some way,
It's that red thread to the top of the
Exactly,
organisation.
yeah.
And what do you expect when you're doing that cascade? What do you expect your leaders to be doing with what they receive when they go into that briefing with their teams?
Owning it and listening. I think listening and probing for understanding, and I think what usually happens is they will come back with, these are the bits that people understood, and these are the bits that people didn't like or didn't understand, and then there's there's another process that kicks off, and sometimes that means you have to go back and redesign things, or sometimes it means you just need to clarify. Okay.
And I guess having that feedback back up the cascade is very, very useful for you for the next time in that ongoing learning piece. Yeah, and it's kind of it's not like it's a business process that has a name. Maybe it does or doesn't. But it feels to me like it's like the blood circulating through the system, right? I mean, you need to be moving them. You need to be moving that around, but you also need to be seeing what's coming back, and it's kind of a constant flow. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Now we were chatting just before we kicked off about the whole Millennials thing, and you can read on the web about Millennials. Is it a thing? Is it not a thing? Is Millennials a thing? I
mean, I think it is a thing. there are quite a lot of things that are similar in that generation to every other generation that came before it. There are quite a lot of things that I admire about that generation that I certainly don't think I felt or aspired to when I was that age.
Things like what?
Things like having a very open view to careers. Things like wanting to balance their lives between personal and professional. And thinking about that quite early, you know,
work-life balance.
Yes,
that's mental.
Yes. But being much more thoughtful. Like, I mean, when I was at that age, I don't think I was thinking about that. I was just thinking about doing my job really well, you know. Whereas much more, I'm in this. This is a marathon, not a sprint. I don't know how many jobs. You're going to have 10, 13 jobs or something. Is that what they say? Yeah. I think there's much more of a sense of I've got this runway ahead of me and I need to be intentional about it, and I'm going to move many times and I'm going to do many different things. So, you know, what am I learning at the moment? What's in it for me? How am I having a fully rounded life? You know, not just learning things and working really hard, but what else is going on for me? And I think also looking for what difference am I making? Like, where's the meaning in this?
Purpose.
Yeah, which I think is a very big thing. And then I think there is a set of things, you know, where they, you know, and again, it's making a wild generalization, where, you know, expectations are very high around the type and regularity of feedback that you give, the amount of personal development you will give, and so that means as a people manager, I think the stakes have probably gone up significantly, right? Because it's not just about driving results, it's really about tuning into each individual in your team. They're all going to want different things. It's about connecting with them on that level of, like, not only just are they doing the job, but what are they learning and what's their own personal development plan. And they're all good things. It's just that's a lot to take on as a manager, and I suppose again stakes are much higher, and that demands more emotionally of managers, I think, as well.
Yeah. And I think when you've built from the ground up, like you have done in Google, excuse me, and in some of the other tech companies around the world, that's probably easier to do because you've grown up with that, arguably, whereas some of the older organizations, the banks and financial services and the older tech companies, the IBMs or the Hewlett Packards that have been around for 50 or 60 or 70 years, that's harder.
Yeah, I think it is, because there are a lot of things that are in our, I suppose you say, in our DNA as a company, how transparent we are, how much information we share with employees, the amount of forums they have to ask questions and challenge, the access they have, to senior levels. I mean, their hierarchy thing kind of isn't really there. And that's kind of built into the way you manage. And I do notice that when we hire people who have managed extremely successfully, 10, 15, 20 years in other places, and they come in here, I do always have to sit them down and say, I know you've managed people before, but it's different. And it's different because of that, because of those values that we have. So I don't envy people joining sometimes, because when you've kind of learned your defaults as a manager in another place, it's quite hard to switch them. It
is difficult, and I guess when you look at an organisation where, I think we were saying beforehand, half are millennial generation, that's tough. Yeah, it is, and actually there's the whole idea of kind of multi-generational teams as well, because people are at different stages of their lives as well. Yeah, and this is something we spend a lot of time trying to equip our managers to deal with, because I said, half the job is delivering the results, but at least half of the job is caring for the individuals in your team, and thinking about all of that. Yeah. And from my perspective, they're definitely the ones who are best placed to do that. With the best will in the world, you are not going to know everybody that works on this site, but each of those people leaders within the hierarchy does. And they're the ones that eventually can provide that caring environment that you talked about. Yeah.
In the end of the day, it's the person you meet every day in work, who you're having those daily interactions. I mean, they're your manager, is it, right? Yeah, I completely agree. And it's a privileged role. It is a privileged role.
I'm not sure they may think that the whole time.
Well, I think we're, managing a team in here of the highly motivated, people that we hire from right across the region. I think over 1,000 universities we hire from.
Wow.
In our graduate hiring. It's there's obviously a challenge in that, in managing across cultures and things like that as well. But it is at the end of the day, I think any person managing here after a few years will look back at it and go, yeah, you know what,
amazing,
that was formative. Yeah
totally. What would you say are some of the things, just carrying on the millennial theme, what are some of the practical things do you think that other organisations listening to this who have that mix of, because I think there's five generations in the workforce now? What advice could you give to some of those organisations where they have that kind of multi-generational workforce to help make sure that everyone's pulling in the same direction?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of the good practice applies in terms of knowing what your message is, being consistent on your themes, being accountable. I think then you need to think about different ways of communicating, though. And again, I'm not sure that's a new concept. People have different styles and different ways of absorbing information.
It's always the basic stuff that necessarily people aren't doing.
Yeah, but again, I would think about, email is probably, in many ways the laziest form of communication. Some people like reading email, but a lot of people don't. So increasingly internally for our communication, we would use videos or podcasts or listening sessions, or just in more informal chats. And so just thinking about how the message is being understood and absorbed at every level within the organisation. And I think as a leader, like I'd say 90% of my job is people and communications, and just getting out there and thinking about the different ways, and thinking about the different ways that you're delivering the message, and that it is consistent in all of the different ways that you're doing it. I think if you're going to engage in kind of social media and or more social kind of ways of delivering messages like that internally, my experience is, again, particularly with millennials, is you have to commit to it, right? You can't just dip in, so if you're going to do it, but have a plan and do it properly. Don't just dip in and +1 or like something and then go away and never be seen again. Because again, I think people just see through that. I think the other thing generally is getting that group involved in problem solving, and I think that kind of feeds that sense of purpose that they want to have. So whether it's problem solving in the day job that they're doing, or problem solving in something maybe from the point of view of corporate social responsibility, it's actually trusting them to actually giving them a problem, giving them a big problem to solve and challenging them in that way. I think is I think that's also another really good thing to do, and just kind of put something out there and see what comes back to you. And every time I've done that, I've been really impressed. And
I think that for me, when you go out and ask for feedback, when you ask for people to get involved in solving those big problems, even if the solutions they come up with aren't the solution that eventually gets put in place, that gets deployed, actually the big thing for me is having been asked.
Yes.
You've asked me, you've looked at my feedback, you've taken my feedback on board, you've considered my feedback, you haven't gone ahead with it, but you've explained why.
You've explained why.
I understand.
Yeah, you do have to close the loop and explain why, and explain why you chose to do what you did. But I think being listened to, being involved in problem solving, again, I think with the millennial group, my sense is that they want to contribute, and they want to solve big problems. And God knows, in a business of this size, we have many problems to solve. So, using them as a source of ideas, particularly because they're so close to customers as well, and have a real sense of that, a real sense of how they show up for customers, and that closeness, I think, and can mean they are often the best people to solve the problems, right? Yeah,
of course. I spend a lot of time talking to clients about employee engagement. And I think in many cases, employee engagement is still a bit of a thing. And I often hear the term, and I wrote a blog about it the other week, have you done your engagement yet? I'm doing that two thing. For those people listening, I'm doing that thing on my fingers, the two things. I guess in a culture like Google, the way the culture's been built from the bottom up, you don't necessarily have to put a huge focus on employee engagement, because the way the culture works, the way you hire, the way you train leaders, does that create an engaging culture, or do you have to work at it?
I still think you need to work at it.
Okay.
One of my colleagues here has a great saying, which is culture is like French bread, you need to bake it every day. I stole that one.
I shall re-steal it.
Yeah, you can re-steal it.
Yeah.
No, I think you still need to work at it. I think you still need to work at it. Because it doesn't just... I think the moment you think it's just going to happen is the moment when it stops happening. Yeah. Because the thing is, it's the signals you're sending. Do you know what I mean? And you send a signal in everything you do. And if you start to move away from that, you get lazy and you fall back on your defaults, and and then people get confused, and that becomes toxic, right?
Yeah.
Because then people, who have high expectations from you as a leader, will say, "Oh, well, you said this, and you said this was important, but now you're not saying it anymore. Why is it not important?" I often get that feedback. You haven't talked about this in a while, and I'm thinking, "Oh my God, I thought you were sick to death of me talking about it."
You remembered that?
Yeah, but I'm saying it so often, like I'm sick. It's the way sometimes you're saying something so often yourself, you're thinking, "I must be boring the hell out of everybody."
Yeah.
But then you get feedback that you haven't said it, or is this not important anymore? So you have to think about everything you do being a signal, so even every email I send out, I'm kind of checking back to think, okay, well, what's the reference point somebody would have reading this? And not just to send out here's an update, but here's an update that relates to that thing that I said was important at the start of the year. Remember?
Link and label.
So this training I want you to do. I'm not just nagging you. I'll do this training. Remember, we said this was important for our customers at the start of the year. So I think it is. We've an incredibly strong culture, and it's a wonderful place to work. It's a wonderful place to lead, but it still requires you to work at it every day.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So tell me a little bit about your leadership role models. Who is it that you look up to?
Ooh. I don't know that I have specific people or a book I've read about somebody and I think, oh my God, I want to be that person. Aren't they wonderful? I like people who have their non-negotiables and stick by them and are consistent with them. I like people who are good coaches, because I think you can report to people who are great leaders and managers, but they don't necessarily, sit down and put the effort into personal development that requires, right? Yeah. And I suppose over the years I've had a few different people who at certain pivotal points in my career have been great role models, have given me great feedback or been great role models, and so it's more like a pastiche, or so it's not like one individual person represented everything for me, but I know some of the earliest managers I had in AOL, female managers certainly for me were role models around just being able to do a job that was very demanding, but also do a really high powered job, but have kids, but also have a life that you would want to have. Do you know what I mean? Because sometimes you look at people and think, I know you're managing it all, but I wouldn't want that life. So there have been some times when at pivotal moments I've seen people do things and think, yeah, okay, well that means I could do it. And in Google I've had plenty of different leaders that I've learned from, and I think just leaders who have strong values and they're non-negotiables for them and they stick to them, that consistency builds trust in an organization. Sure. And sometimes sometimes you mightn't like it, but you get to know it, and that trust is really important actually, because then people get to know what to expect.
Sorry, listeners, that was me pulling the microphone over with my headphone lead while Fionnuala was in the middle of talking. Let me ask you then, just a wee build on that, just very quickly. What are some of your values? What do you hold dear?
Yeah, I'm honest hard work. I do believe hard work brings you luck, and so I would live by that myself and look for that in the people that I work with. I like honesty as well. Just I like people to say what they mean and follow through on the stuff that they say they're going to follow through on. And I suppose in work, like to acknowledge that people have lives outside work, you know, so and for that to kind of mean something in terms of giving people the space when they need space, you know, because again, you're managing a team of people at different life stages and people need different things at different times.
Sure.
I think that one of the most powerful things you can do is to acknowledge when people need a break or need time off, or, you know, just you know, need to do something different, or just need a little bit of breathing space. I think that's, you know, because if you're in a job and you don't think you have that, that's incredibly stressful.
It is. It can add to an already sometimes stressful situation, as you say, with people at different life stages.
Yes.
For sure.
Yeah.
Very last one, and I like to ask everybody this question: what leadership advice, what one piece of leadership advice would you give to your 20-year-old self if you look back?
Speak up more.
Speak up more.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yes, I think I only started speaking up halfway through my career, so yeah.
So there you go from Fionnuala Meehan. Speak up more. Listen, thanks a million for having me.
It was a pleasure.
It's been really, really nice talking to you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening. For more on inspiring change and to read our blog, please visit inspiringchange.ie.